encompassing all social groups. Humanism, the definition, means to serve the common interest of fellow humans. Integrity means adherence to the moral and ethical principles, honesty, reliability, consistency in words and acts, and a sense of responsibility. UAJE supports diverse values, cultures, religions, races, ethnicities, and languages as a university with students from all across Indonesia. UAJE's diversity is an asset for further collaboration and synergy in preparing for a better future.
Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta memiliki 4 kampus yang terbagi menjadi Kampus 1, Gedung Santo Alfonsus. Kampus 2, Gedung Santo Thomas Aquinas. Kampus 3, Gedung Santo Bonaventura. Dan Kampus 4, Gedung Bunda Teresa. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta memiliki fakultas dengan berbagai program studi sarjana, program studi magister, dan International Undergraduate Program.
Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta is a second home for every individual to develop and share information, and a university with a high-quality education to attain unlimited aspirations and accomplishments. To achieve the goals, UAJE provides classrooms with a hybrid learning system, laboratories in each faculty as a room to explore, co-working space as a discussion room, medical personnel who are always available in the university clinic room, and a library that provide books, e-books, and digital libraries to open a wide window onto the world in various ways.
UAJ selalu konsisten memberikan pelayanan yang didasari rasa solidaritas kepada sesama. Selama saya bekerja di UAJ, saya merasakan kekeluargaan yang sangat kuat menjadi dasar bagi seluruh sivitas akademika.
UAJE endeavors to develop graduates who are ethical, creative, innovative, adaptive, transformational, collaborative, and benevolent. All these are aimed to help students achieve their future dreams.
Mendidik itu mengajarkan ilmu pengetahuan dan berbela rasa serta berkontribusi pada kesejahteraan masyarakat. Hal tersebut menjadi landasan fundamental bagi Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta untuk mencetak generasi muda yang unggul di bidangnya dan memiliki integritas moral yang tinggi. Saya bangga menjadi bagian dari Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta. Viva UAJE, kami bangga ada di sini.
Semestinya engkau bisa Selamat datang di Gedung Slamet Riyadi, Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta dengan bangga menjadi tuan rumah Lomba Debat Indonesia tahun 2025. Ajang yang mempertemukan para pemikir muda terbaik dari SMA seluruh Indonesia. Di sini, gagasan diuji, keberanian diuji, dan logika dipertajam. Kompetisi ini bukan hanya tentang menang, tetapi tentang bagaimana setiap peserta menyuarakan masa depan. Dari Sabang hingga Merauke, para delegasi hadir membawa semangat, budaya, dan harapan. Bersatu dalam satu panggung argumentasi terbesar untuk SMA di Indonesia. Selamat datang di Lomba Debat Indonesia 2025. Siapkan argumen terbaikmu, tunjukkan potensimu, dan jadilah generasi pemikir masa depan.
Cika, dia telah lulus SMA, tapi bingung mau kuliah di mana?
Jangan bingung, mari bergabung bersama kami di Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta.
UAJY memiliki 7 fakultas dan 14 program studi yang dapat jadi pilihan loh.
Jangan khawatir, UAJY menyediakan miliaran beasiswa yang bisa kamu dapatkan. Tentunya, terdapat program seleksi yang masih dibuka. Informasi lebih lanjut dapat mengunjungi situs pmb.uajy.ac.id. So, tunggu apa lagi?
Bakal nyesel loh kalau nggak daftar sekarang.
Welcome to Yogyakarta, the city of students. The city where a significant number of public and private schools and universities are located. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta, a private university established on September 27, 1965 by Yayasan Slamet Riyadi Yogyakarta.
Dalam bahasa Sanskerta, Atma berarti jiwa dan Jaya berarti unggul, sehingga Atmajaya berarti jiwa yang unggul. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta juga memiliki semboyan dalam bahasa Latin Serviens in Lumine Veritatis, yang artinya melayani dalam cahaya kebenaran.
The four core values upheld by UAJY are excellence, inclusivity, humanism, and integrity. Excellence implies a quality or being better than others. Inclusivity means encompassing all social groups. Humanism, the definition, means to serve the common interest of fellow humans. Integrity means adherence to the moral and ethical principles, honesty, reliability, consistency in words and acts, and a sense of responsibility. UAJY supports diverse values, cultures, religions, races, ethnicities, and languages as a university with students from all across Indonesia. UAJY's diversity is an asset for further collaboration and synergy in preparing for a better future.
Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta memiliki 4 kampus yang terbagi menjadi Kampus 1, Gedung Santo Alfonsus. Kampus 2, Gedung Santo Thomas Aquinas. Kampus 3, Gedung Santo Bonaventura. Dan Kampus 4, Gedung Bunda Teresa. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta memiliki fakultas dengan berbagai program studi sarjana, program studi magister, dan international undergraduate program.
Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta is the second home for every individual to develop and share information, and a university with a high-quality education to attain unlimited aspirations and accomplishments. To achieve the goals, UAJY provides classrooms with hybrid learning system, laboratories in each faculty as a room to explore, co-working space as a discussion room, medical personnel who are always available in the university clinic room, and a library that provide books, e-books, and digital libraries to open a wide window onto the world in various ways.
UAJY selalu konsisten memberikan pelayanan yang didasari rasa solidaritas kepada sesama. Selama saya bekerja di UAJY, saya merasakan kekeluargaan yang sangat kuat menjadi dasar bagi seluruh sivitas akademika.
UAJY endeavors to develop graduates who are ethical, creative, innovative, adaptive, transformational, collaborative, and benevolent. All these are aimed to help students achieve their future dreams.
Mendidik itu mengajarkan ilmu pengetahuan dan berbela rasa serta berkontribusi pada kesejahteraan masyarakat. Hal tersebut menjadi landasan fundamental bagi Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta untuk mencetak generasi muda yang unggul di bidangnya dan memiliki integritas moral yang tinggi. Saya bangga menjadi bagian dari Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta. Viva UAJY, kami bangga ada di sini.
Semestinya engkau bisa
Mencobanya lebih bijak,
semampunya berusaha, berjuang jujur berkarya,
tanpa pernah meragukan kemampuan pada kita. Sungguh percayakan saja, kita istimewa bisa.
sungguh sebuah karunia.
Kita
Selamat datang di Gedung Slamet Riyadi, Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta dengan bangga menjadi tuan rumah Lomba Debat Indonesia tahun 2025. Ajang yang mempertemukan para pemikir muda terbaik dari SMA seluruh Indonesia. Di sini, gagasan diuji, keberanian diuji, dan logika dipertajam. Kompetisi ini bukan hanya tentang menang, tetapi tentang bagaimana setiap peserta menyuarakan masa depan. Dari Sabang hingga Merauke, para delegasi hadir membawa semangat, budaya, dan harapan. Bersatu dalam satu panggung argumentasi terbesar untuk SMA di Indonesia. Selamat datang di Lomba Debat Indonesia 2025. Siapkan argumen terbaikmu, tunjukkan potensimu, dan jadilah generasi pemikir masa depan.
Cika, dia telah lulus SMA, tapi bingung mau kuliah di mana?
Jangan bingung, mari bergabung bersama kami di Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta.
UAJY memiliki 7 fakultas dan 14 program studi yang dapat jadi pilihan loh.
Jangan khawatir, UAJY menyediakan miliaran beasiswa yang bisa kamu dapatkan. Tentunya, terdapat program seleksi yang masih dibuka. Informasi lebih lanjut dapat mengunjungi situs pmb.uajy.ac.id. So, tunggu apa lagi?
Bakal nyesel loh kalau nggak daftar sekarang.
Alright, welcome everyone to the third round of LD National English Divisions 2025. Congratulations for making this so far. I'm Manda, will be the chair for this round. I will be with Audi as well for the judges for this round. There's several reminders before we begin. First of all, don't forget to keep timing your own self. Please use your own timer, or otherwise you can also take a look on the time that is displayed on the screen. Second of all, since this will be live stream, make sure that you reread again your notes. Make sure you avoid any kind of name dropping as well. Yeah, I think that's it for the reminder. Other than that, if you have any POI, we really encourage you to over and accept POI, but please just stand up or as a POI. If you have any preference as well, just let the other speakers know each other. Thank you. I would like to invite first propositions to open the debate for this round. Here.
A point of stance then, firstly. What is our stance? We don't oppose the artificial womb in and of itself. We oppose the development that exists. Why is this the case? Because of the exploitation that occurs on their side of the house when you try to focus much on the development in and of itself without the necessary structural protections that exist. Why is this the case? Firstly, let's look at the status quo, and particularly of those companies that exist in the status quo, for example. We think that these companies that exist in the status quo are likely to do exploitation like what? For example, the exploitation of surrogate mothers to do their research, the exploitation of people who are impoverished by signing in NDAs and things like that. We think that at the end of the day, the reason why they do this is because of three reasons. Firstly, because one, that there's no ethical guidelines that exist because this is new grounds. Two, because of the fact that it is cheaper to get these individuals who are already in a rut and they require that much, for example, capacity for a quick social mobility in and of itself. But thirdly, because simply the fact that they don't necessarily have that, that they have that, for example, sense of urgency from their impoverished state in and of itself, right? If the likely response from their side of the house is they may say, companies have the incentive to do good because of reputation, but precisely because they have the incentive to maintain their reputation, it's likely that their reputation, that the way they maintain reputation is through NDAs and such like that, because of how, for example, it's much faster and cheaper, because companies simply just want profit. They simply want to be able to make faster and faster progress in and of itself. That is why at the end of the day, companies have, for example, the incentive to be really bad incentive at the end of the day, right? We think, what is our counterfactual then? We think our counterfactual is simply that we want structural protection first. What does this mean? This means, we simply want to oppose the artificial wombs rather than oppose the development of artificial wombs rather than the artificial womb in and of itself, right? What does this look like? This looks like first maintaining the ethical guidelines and, for example, not allowing the exploitation of these individuals, for example. Why do we have the capacity? Firstly, because this comes from the government in and of itself, right? Where does the incentive come from? This comes from the checks and balances. Let's say we were playing in a developed world. In the end of the day, there's a checks and balances that exist from the social movement that they're able to, for example, have that structural protection to give, for example, pressure towards the government. In a developing society, you still have the incentive to cater towards global feminist movement, for example, who want to protect these women from that sort of like exploitative form of research in and of itself, right? At the end of the day, we think that this debate is simply about who is able to give better protection towards women in and of itself, right? So then on onto a point of argument in and of itself. Firstly, about development, we think that the urgency in this, we think the urgency that exists is simply the fact that there's immoral development that exists. Why is this the case? Two reasons. Firstly, the fact that there's exploitation, like I've mentioned before. For example, those poor people, for example, why? Because it's simply easy. It's, for example, you don't have to do a lot of persuasion because of how they simply require that much social mobility at the end of the day, because it's so easy for them to just get into the research and become exploited at the end of the day later on. But also the fact that, secondly, the fact that there's no grounded ethical laws that try to maintain and give these individuals the structural protection that they require, for example, at the end of the day, right? But secondly, the fact is that even if you were to have that development of itself, we think that the development itself in the long term is simply uncertain, i.e. that you don't that they have to prove to you why in the end of the day this will be able to be spread out towards individuals in an equal manner at the end of the day, right? And the reason this is important is because even if it was successful, it's likely that those who use artificial wombs are those who are already well off in and of itself. It's unlikely that these individuals who require artificial wombs, because of the fact that maybe because of the fact that they don't have that capacity at the end of the day, they're likely to, for example, be those who already have the capacity and already well off at the end of the day, right? Meaning that those, for example, poor individuals do not necessarily have the capacity in and of itself. It's unlikely. We have to prove why they're able to spread this at the end of the day towards those individuals in and of itself, right? It's unlikely to actually liberate women, for example, from, the problems that exist of gestation and such in and of itself, right? Which means that on their side of the house, if they try to push to you about how there's going to be independence towards women at the end of the day because of the artificial wombs, it's unlikely to happen because you don't actually have it's unlikely for this development to be able to be spread towards a wider scale of individuals themselves, right? And so why do we fix this at the end of the day, right? Because of the fact that we have the development of structural protection at the end of the day, right? What does this mean? This means, why is this the case? Because of the fact that on the fact that we have structural protection of itself, that we're able to, for example, protect these women from the exploitation of itself, as I've talked to you on the counterfactual at the end of the day, because of the fact that there's an incentive, for example, for these women, there's an incentive for the government to give, for example, these ethical guidelines in and of itself. We think that this motion is simply about us opposing the development in and of itself, right? Why is this the case? Because it's likely to come from, for example, impoverished people at the end of the day who don't have any other place to go to at the end of the day, right? And again, on the point then. On to your point. 3, 2.
If your case is about exploitation, we have ethical guidelines.
You have to prove that within your speech in and of itself about how you have that ethical guidelines. But even then, I've already told you about the mechanization of what research looks like at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, that research right now is one that is simply one that doesn't have that simply ethical guidelines in and of itself, or at least at the very least, it's very likely for companies to try and exploit those sort of things because of how easy it is, for example, that companies are the ones who are likely to create these artificial wombs in and of itself, right? And so then onto why we're able to fix this is simply, as I mentioned to you before, that we're likely to be able to fix it simply because of that we have structural protection in and of itself first. But secondly, on to impact stand. What does this mean? This means that it's likely to have accountability towards the government in and of itself, for example, towards these women in and of itself, because how you're pushed, for example, how the government is pushed towards actually creating these ethical guidelines in and of itself. We don't think that this sort of thing is exclusive on their side of the house, because the fact is that, at the end of the day, simply companies want to have that sense of profit and security, that they're able to create a faster and faster development from their competitors in and of itself, right? But secondly, that on our side of the house, you're likely to create more accountability towards the companies in and of itself, right? Because the fact that, we've already told you about the fact that there's likely incentive from other companies in and of itself, but also the fact that there's exploitation that exists is very unlikely for your side to not create this exploitation in and of itself, because the fact is that this is the nature of health development in and of itself, right? But secondly, on the fact is that we actually save the vulnerable actors in and of itself, i.e. women who are impoverished, who are already, for example, experimented on surrogate women and things like that at the end of the day, right? And within on their side of the house, you don't necessarily have this counterbalance to be able to have this social protection in and of itself, right? We weigh this then on simply two things. Firstly, on vulnerable actors in and of itself, on the fact that, we actually protect those women who come from these, for example, impoverished areas, those women who, for example, in the status quo are exploited as surrogate mothers, who are exploited in for example, the current status quo from the health experiments and things like that at the end of the day. But secondly, on the short term, we think that at the end of the day, on our side of the house, you have, for example, those things like feminist movement who are able to give you that sense of push for example, for these things that are able to give accountability to the government and companies and etc. But secondly, on the long term, you're able to, for example, have at the end of the day this product that's more widespread at the end of the day, for example, or those or for example, the development that is far more ethical because of the fact that you have the structural protection in and of itself, right? We think in the end that on the comparative is that they don't have this necessary structural protection. They don't have this ability to, for the women. It's much more likely on their side of the house for these women to be exploited at the end of the day because they have no structural protection for these sort of things. We think that when they try to push for your development and things like that, in the end, what you create is much more exploitation. What you create is, for example, simply just unethical ways of research, and for that reason, I'm proud to propose.
Thank you, first proposition, for that fine speech. Before proceeding to the first opposition, can I confirm to the ORCOM if this is also being in the Zoom or how? So previously for the judges from SELN, YouTube only. Yang dari juri yang Zoom. Itu aja. Memang ada itu kan ya specific treatment. Okay, with that case, I'd like to invite first opposition.
Because we use the microphone, I just want to confirm if my voice is audible. Okay. The premise of Goff's case is based on A, assumption, and B, misunderstanding of the motion. Two things about assumption. The thing is, their case is too extreme. If you talk about exploitation, we already have the mechanism to counter for it, right? There is ethical guidelines of all research, whether you are researching for medication for COVID-19, for SARS, for anything that is medical, for anything that does have the risk of harming human beings. Therefore, this is one of those research. We already have the mechanism for it in the status quo. We don't need to bring any more mechanization insofar as it has already existed as a policy. But moreover, the thing is, company is reasonable or rational as an actor. Therefore, they don't want to bear the risk of image, optical, advertisement, reputation, destruction that happens from killing a baby or even killing an embryo. Therefore, it is too far of a risk to take. Your arguments about exploitation doesn't run. But moreover, I want to talk to you that, okay, let's do the setup because PM doesn't do a great job about it. The thing is, the differences between OP and GOF is that we want to oppose or support the development of this research. Therefore, the burden that both sides have to prove is why the development of artificial wombs brings more good than harm. The problem with PM speech is that the harm that exists within artificial womb comes from the development, but from a method of development that doesn't necessarily exist in the status quo insofar as it is an illegal research research like system, for example, etc., etc. We do, I think, as an opposition side, what we do support is the existence of reasonable development of this research, not an illegal development of this research. It is like more fairer for this debate to develop. Yeah, I think we want to go for that. But moreover, what's out of the discussion is that we support the development, not the existence. With development, there is a natural tendency for prices of goods to go down. Therefore, Ops case about this being elitist is a misunderstanding of the motion insofar as I would argue to you we make it more accessible for children. No, thank you. I'll get one in 5 minutes. But moreover, first argument, the thing is this pregnancy in particular is harmful and not inaccessible. What do we mean by this? The thing is, people want to have children for many reasons, because they want to continue the family trees or the genetics or the tradition, for example, or simply they want to become a parental figure because they are inspired by people from social media who have children, right? The problem in the status quo that exists right now is that having children is not accessible for people wanting to have children. Few reasonings for this. A, the fact that capitalism exists, right? There is constant push or productivity, comparison, or constant push of you developing as a human being in your office, in your academic, for example, etc., etc. Well, 5 minutes. What happens is that you make pregnancy or you make gestation more costly without this artificial womb. What do we mean by this? Insofar as pregnancy pushes you to stay on your bed for like 9 months, or not even even 4 months, for example. But in that 4th month, there is a cost that you incur insofar as if you work for that 4 months, you can get promoted in your office, for example. You can get higher ranks in your university, for example, right? This cost, people don't want to incur this cost. People are disincentivized from having children insofar as they want to have children in the very first place. They are limited to do so. What's the harm? A, these potential parents fail to have children, right? It's either they fail to have children or either they fail to get promoted at their jobs or getting higher ranks at their uni, for example, which is both bad for them as an individual, right? But insofar as capitalism affects everyone, it is very likely for people under government world that they would achieve some like population winter, like the significant drop in population birth rate, for example, which is harmful because we see countries like Japan having it, we see countries like many countries having it, bad for the economy, bad for the countries, bad for the livelihood of the people, etc., etc. Right? The thing is, this is what prevents up from saying like, oh, if they aren't able to nurture embryo, they aren't able to nurture children, therefore this is okay. No, this is not okay, right? The thing is, we need people to stay reproducing so that we have populations, so that our life is not miserable as an old person who is not productive anymore. The mechanism of change is simple. We reduce the barrier of entry to have children. We make reproduction.
Parallel technologies like in vitro fertilization is still prohibitively expensive, even though it has been around for a time. You have no fiat to say the price will magically reduce, be more accessible, or subsidized at all.
I think there is an urgency to make this accessible, insofar as if company doesn't want to do it, government will do it. Insofar as if children are not being produced, company will incur a cost economically, therefore there will be subsidy, for example, etc., etc. Insofar as like country has the incentive from of it, i.e. if Japan has have the option to do artificial womb, I think they would do it insofar as they have money, they don't have people, right? But moreover, second argument, the thing is, reproduction process uniquely harms women in the process. What's the problem? Woman, you decreases the power that the pregnancy decreases the power that women have in the relationship's power dynamics. What's the root cause of this? The thing is, pregnancy creates vulnerability as a consequence of gestation. This is extremely apparent towards women insofar as they aren't able to be as productive, insofar as their flexibility are limited. Perhaps they could only go around in their room, for example, or in their bed, for example. They could not go to work, go make money, or go make friends, get along with their friends, etc., etc. But moreover, the thing is, the relation power dynamics shifts towards the breadwinner who the woman is reliant into. Who is this? This is the male counterparts, right? So the impact is clear. What you do under their side of the house is that you exacerbate the value of patriarchy, which feminists doesn't want, insofar as if they say they want to cater feminism. I don't think it's true insofar as feminism doesn't, insofar as many feminist movement right now are advocating for self-partnership insofar as they don't want to marry because they want to like not have children and be productive. We allow for feminists to marry and have the benefit of a relationship but not incur the cost of pregnancy or having children, right? Therefore, what you advocate is not child-free, which many people are gutturally opposed into insofar as they want to have children. What you propose is instead artificial womb, which increases the buy-in into feminism insofar as the advocation is not child-free, which is radical. The advocation is just having child on a different method, right? But moreover, outside of the feminism circle, you harm women insofar as there will be more gaslighting, insofar as the power balance shift from women, from like balance to men, for example. There will be more gaslighting, i.e., hey, wife, I nurture you when you are vulnerable, you should be better to me, right? Those kind of things we don't want. We better the relationship model better insofar as the power dynamics balance. But moreover, this is important. This is crucially important as there are many narrative pointed towards women insofar as compared to men, women have time limitation to reproduce. Therefore, what happens is that they are pressured in their productive years. For example, 20, 30 years. Yeah, bad. Proud to oppose.
Thank you, first opposition, for the fine speech. Next, second prop.
Trigger warning, everything I say is for the sake of the debate. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. The entirety of the opposition case relies on the framing that somehow, for example, safety nets already exist and the ethical guidelines are already enough, right? I will show you why this is factually untrue with a couple points of reframing. Firstly, why the ethical guidelines fail. Firstly, we think it's a very novel field of work, right? That is to say, it's for example like AI, for example, or it's for example like genetically modified organic food, for example. That is to say that, like, for example, the law and regulation that already exists cannot keep up because the lawmakers are actually adapting and they have to, for example, work with these technocrats, and it's very hard for them to actually make law that ensures that ethical guidelines are actually taken into account. But secondly, I think that there's also an issue of like the revolving door effect. What is the revolving door effect? The revolving door effect is an effect where, for example, those people who are working in companies actually go to, for example, the government after they retire, or vice versa. That is to say, exactly because this exists, like for example in the tobacco industry, where for example when you are a CEO and you retire, you go to the government, you have an incentive as a company, or you have the incentive as the government to actually not, for example, regulate that well, exactly because, for example, you want to cozy up, exactly because, for example, when you want to retire and become a CEO, you want to make sure you still get profits at the end of the day, right? But secondly, we think companies have massive capacity, right? Things like, for example, massive armies of lawyers at the end of the day. Look at, for example, Monsanto, who after they, for example, harmed a lot of people with their genetically modified food, they literally had smear campaigns released on people. This literally shows that these companies have the capacity to silence victims at the end of the day, so we don't think ethical guidelines actually exist. But secondly, I would also like to point out that this is this House opposed motion. This is a value judgment motion. You simply cannot claim, oh, there will be ethical guidelines without explaining capacity, without explaining the incentive. I don't understand why the ethical guidelines exist on their side of the House. But fourthly then, into safety nets, right? Why safety nets already exist on our side of the House, and why their case is actually inexclusive. Firstly, we think we've already told you that in vitro fertilization already exists. That is to say, even if women want to get pregnant, you can still do it by in vitro fertilization. But secondly, an even better safety net is the fact that surrogates already exist. That is to say, you can literally have, for example, like another woman get pregnant for you, and you can still take the child after that child pops out after 9 months. That is to say then, on our side of the House, safety nets already exist, and therefore their case about, for example, oh, women are, for example, going to be more productive on their side of the House is something very inexclusive. If women wanted to get children, they could still get it on our side of the House at the end of the day, right? But secondly, let's also reframe about how, for example, population, or like why people are not going to, for example, like, opt in, or for example, why women are, for example, leaving the workplace, and so on and so forth. We don't think it's because women have to be like pregnant for 9 months. We think the main reason why, for example, women are, for example, leaving the workforce and so on and so forth is the fact, or why women don't want to have children, is the fact that, for example, the high living costs that exist in the status quo, for example. I think this is something that is out of this debate, and I don't think the urgency exists on your side of the House to fix it just by introducing artificial wombs, right? But secondly, I think at the end of the day, like these women can still, for example, even if they're 9 months pregnant, these women can still do things like work when you have things like remote work that already exists in the status quo, right? So I don't understand their case at all. I think their case falls at the end of the day, right? I think even if these ethical guidelines are possible, I think these ethical guidelines are still going to fall on your side of the House because it's simply just going to like not be followed by these companies because they have an incentive for profit at the end of the day. But last point of reframing before I go into my response, right? They tell you that it's going to be cheaper. I think we've already responded to this by saying that it's novel. So for example, the massive cost of development is probably going to make it very expensive and inaccessible at the end of the day. Look at how for example, the POI literally tells you that in vitro fertilization is very expensive. But secondly, we think the development is probably going to happen in, for example, those developed countries, right? That is to say that it's probably still going to be expensive. You're probably not going to live in a third world country and be able to access it at the end of the day, right? And thirdly, we also think that there are things like, for example, you have to go through many clinical trials that exist for things like drugs. That is to say then, on your side of the House, it's not going to be cheap. It's going to be very expensive when you have to go through all of these drugs. It still takes a very, very long time if it's going to get cheap, and it's extremely unguaranteed on your side of the House, right? But okay, let's move on to a couple of responses, right? Their main case was about how this actually harms the power balance, right? Firstly, no, I simply think this
this is not the case, right? I don't think power balances shift, and I think even if they do, safety nets have already existed, right? We think safety nets already exist in the form of what, right? We think we've already told you that things like surrogate mothers already exist, for example, how things like in vitro fertilization already exist, for example. But I think the premise of their case about how power balances shift is the fact that, like, oh, for example, like men are, oh, for example, if you don't have these artificial wombs, men are going to be the main breadwinner. I think this doesn't make any sense at the end of the day. I think people already know, for example, the struggle that women have to go through to get pregnant. I actually think the flip is very simple then. But before I continue to my flip, I'd just like to explain the fact that, yeah, I think that, like, people know, for example, that if you're a woman and you're 9 months pregnant, people respect you, for example, people respect you for actually going through that pain, right? But the flip end is very simple. I think power balance shifts happens on your side of the house because it signals to men that women's suffering isn't even mandatory. When you tell men that, for example, oh, the women's suffering isn't even something that is like actually like, for example, normal. I mean, it's not even something that is, for example, mandatory, and women can do other options, like, for example, take these like these safety nets that already exist on our side of the house, or these artificial wombs that already exist on your side of the house. I think what it signals to men is that, yeah, women's suffering is not that much. They are not a vulnerable actor, and they shouldn't be protected at the end of the day, right? This exists only on your side of the house, exactly because you have these artificial wombs that tell women, for example, that they don't have to, for example, like, yeah, they don't have to, for example, suffer at the end of the day, right? So you're only harming the perception of men. But okay then, what is the weighing then? I think the weighing from both sides is simple. I think on our side of the house, we win on scale. That is to say, on your side of the house, the only people you are going to be protecting are, for example, those, for example, already privileged women whose main problem is actually having children, not those, for example, impoverished women who face things like exploitation, right? So firstly, we weigh this on the vulnerable actors. We're able to protect those women who are actually facing structural issues at the end of the day. But secondly, I think we win this on scale, right? On your side of the house, the only women you're protecting are those privileged women. On our side of the house, we're going to be protecting more women who are, for example, like more underprivileged and so on and so forth. We're also going to be protecting negative societal stigma against women at the end of the day, right? But okay then, moving on to an extension about how the societal perception of women actually shifts on your side of the house. I think the premise is very simple. The development of this artificial womb leads to the devaluation of women in the status quo. Where's the urgency? I think it's very simple. Women are still seen as objects at the end of the day. Their suffering isn't seen at the end of the day, and it's, for example, seen as, for example, yeah, just like something that something that shouldn't even be taken into account. I think this harms, for example, women's integration to society, but it also harms women's validation at the end of the day, right? What are the root problems of this? I think there are two. One, women's suffering are seen as less, but secondly, women's suffering are not seen as mandatory. But okay then, moving on to mechanism. What happens on opposition, or what happens on opposition? I think women are seen as less when you tell them that, for example, the suffering that they face is something that isn't, for example, mandatory, that you can actually, for example, yes, still just get away with it, and that, for example, these women don't even have to suffer, these women don't have to go through 9 months of pain, right? But secondly, how does this happen on opposition side? I think the development of artificial wombs will send a signal to society through things like, for example, social media and through news network and so on and so forth. It shows to people at the end of the day that the most fundamental of women's suffering can be alleviated, and that they're not the actual vulnerable, right? Because this narrative, or like, for example, this artificial wombs would probably interact with current narratives from, for example, the manosphere, or, for example, capitalism, that tells you, for example, oh, women are not suffering. Women are actually, for example, doing things like artificially increasing their like dating market value and so on and so forth. When you have things like artificial wombs, it shows you, for example, that women, it signals to, for example, these manosphere men that women have even more like opportunities as women to, for example, like alleviate their suffering, and it only does things like, for example, make these people in the manosphere even more angry on the other side of the house. But okay then, let's move into a couple of prerequisites. Firstly, why is this likely to internalize? I think it's likely to internalize because of things like the echo chamber from social media, but also because of the fact that the manospheric discourse is also that large at the end of the day. But secondly, why is society likely to actually accept this, for example, like this like narrative that actually spreads? I think we've already told you that it intertwines with current narratives that women are at fault for everything from things like the manosphere, or women artificially increase their dating value. So what happens is that people will see this women suffering as, for example, yeah, not that big of a deal at the end of the day, and people will see women as like, you're just like, oh, you're just being being overly dramatic when you're, for example, complaining about 9 months of being pregnant. You can just, for example, opt out of it with things like with the things that already exist in the status quo, right? I think thirdly, why society is likely to take action. I think it's very simple. I think society is already, for example, that like patriarchal. So I think this narrative only strengthens it, and you're only going to further like action that's like negative. And I think why the safety nets fail on your side of the house is because all of the structural protections are already patriarchal. This is an exclusive harm on your side of the house, we think it doesn't happen on our side of the house because we tell you that women are still vulnerable and they probably still need structural protection. But what is the implication of this? I think on your side of the house, people will treat women with less respect, for example, when they see women that are just like, for example, their suffering isn't that big. But secondly, I think companies are likely to do things like, for example, cut like things like maternal leave when they see like, oh, you have other safety nets at the end of the day. Why should I even care about you? Impacts twofold. Firstly, you have more hostility to women because they're not seen as vulnerable. You get things like less social cohesion when you have, for example, a wider polarization of men and women. We think this is harmful for women's like social mobility, and we think it's harmful for their welfare. But secondly, you have less structural protection on your side because companies won't care on your side of the house, and we think companies will, for example, see you as like, yeah, companies just want profit. This leads to more oppression in the long term. We think this is horrible because women are comparative. Even in our worst case, where women, for example, don't get like, for example, this like protection, we think there's already safety nets, and we win on scale. We protect this is the most important metric because you need to protect the most women. Propose.
I think to the second prop for the fine speech, not like to invite second opposition.
Hello, am I audible? Okay, trigger warning. What I will say will contain some sensitive words and etc. Goff tried to frame this debate as if the artificial womb won't be accessible, but we'd argue that the reason it's inaccessible in the status quo is the fact that there are no incentive or an effort to make it accessible in the very first place. We'd argue that once there are efforts to do so, it will be made accessible because there are efforts to publicize that. But then B, on how they try to frame this debate as if harmless pregnancy for women is a privilege, not a right. We believe that we would prove to you on how harmless pregnancy is a right that every woman should have in order to liberate them and etc. But then several responses to their side of the house. In the premise of protection, we'd argue that the protection that already exists is already enough. There are already laws to regulate research based on its ethics and etc. But then B, we'd say that society would demand to know the details of the research in the very first place. So ethically illegal researchers will be limited due to the pressure to publicly explain the details of the technology. Because of the risk that goes with that, we believe that companies won't do this necessarily. But then we'd argue that our model protects women more from exploitation by other actors, because we'd argue that in your side of the house, where development of the artificial womb is inaccessible, meaning that only the privileged or rich ones or the rich ones can access it, meaning that in your side of the house, harmless pregnancy are a privilege rather than a right for every woman. Therefore, majority of women still are harmed physically by pregnancy, like something as simple as backache to something as deadly as death. But also on how women are vulnerable during pregnancy, we don't hear any arguments about them. We don't hear any arguments or points about how they want to increase protection legally for already pregnant women in their side of the house who is struggling or even abused, for example. Comparatively, under our side, we protect women by giving them option to have children without needing to sacrifice their own body and mental. Even if they argue that those sacrifices are necessary, we'd argue that if given an option with the same outcome, which is having a child with less physical cost, they'll take it, and it's just inherently better. But then this will link to my responses of their arguments about devaluation of women. A, they said that suffering will be seen as not mandatory. We'd argue that this is relatively good because that means there will be less pressure for women to suffer. But then B, the concept of women having to suffer more to be respected is just patriarchy, because how they frame about women being able to be respected is because she suffered from pregnancy. We believe that no, even if that women doesn't have the mandatory need to be pregnant in the society, we'd argue that this will be better, and this will make the society's perception about women better, because now women are not seen as a transactional object or like a sexual object that can be used. Yes.
I believe it will be more transactional in your case because you're literally offloading the womb. The woman itself is no longer needed to create a child, so therefore the suffering that they go through is much less valued, and therefore people who use artificial wombs are deemed as lazy or women that are not worth it of having a child because they do not want to endure that pain.
We believe that we don't want women to be seen as invaluable just because they cannot get pregnant themselves. We believe that women's value is so much more than that, and women deserve to be seen as human as much as men. We believe that women also have the right to have a child without being able to sacrifice their body and their mental load for 9 months like men does. We believe that under our side of the house, where this are normalized and seen as something accessible, we believe that this will make a society's perception for women better, because now women will not be seen as a transactional object or a sexual object, for example. And this will be specifically better for people in third world countries where women or little girls that already get into menstrual ages can be married off because they can get pregnant and because they can bear heirs for their husband or etc. We believe that this will liberate women. So their case about how this won't liberate women and at the end of the day is false, and it is very ignorant for them to say so. I have to say so. But then about ethical guidelines again, so to prevent their third speaker from bringing this up again, my already explained on why guidelines are prerequisite for research in the very first place. So it's almost impossible that every research do not have ethical guidelines in the very first place. But even if it's still like incomplete in the status quo, lawmakers will adapt to the development of artificial womb as it goes. Just like AI, on how there was no like law for AI, but now that the development is like so massive, there are laws that is made against it. No, thank you. But then we'd argue that there are no alternatives or like kinds of protection that they try to offer the already pregnant women in their side of the house. Even if they say that, we will give like maternity leave and then they don't have to leave the work because like remote work exists in the very first place. We would argue that their side of the house's argument is so elitist because they don't get the fact that A, artificial womb will only be accessible for the rich ones, but then B, remote work or like maternal leave will only be accessible in like developed countries that already like have progressive law and like no thank you, and like have a massive feminist influence in their very first place. And we'd argue that people that women in developed countries are the privileged ones. We are here to like advocate for women to not be seen as like as an incubator and not be seen as a transactional object, because now once that woman is not seen as like the main the main bearer of children, we believe that we believe that societal perception of women will be shifting into something more personal, like what? Or like their personality. We believe that ironically, society will start to see women as humans that are not like not as simply as valuable as like how much benefit they can give to men or etc. I'll take that, POI.
Wouldn't on your side, people will think of women essentially only because of their womb, and therefore the value in of itself is already in the womb itself, right? So when you divorce that womb from the woman, for example, you divorce the value of that woman too, right?
We believe that A, women's value should not lie on the womb, and B, we believe that if once there are already a distinction between womb and woman in in the patriarchal society's perception, we believe that women will be seen as themselves, women will be seen as how they are and what can they contribute to society more than just childbearers and housemaker, for example. So we'd argue that society's perception towards women will be better, therefore liberation for women will be better. But then again, several call outs for their side of the house. We believe that even if they try to bombard us with like, oh, there are exploitations, there are no protections whatsoever, we believe that there are no efforts whatsoever in their side of the house to like increase the protection for the already pregnant woman under their side of the house, because women are suffering. Pregnant women in third world countries are suffering because there are no subsidies or like, there are no maternity leave and healthcare is inaccessible for them. And there are also less protection for like pregnant women who is abused by their husband because there are societal pressure to like, oh, you have to stay for your husband because you are carrying his child or etc. We believe that women will be seen as who they are once there are distinction between her capability to get pregnant from her womb, and it is separated from who she is and how she is as a person. We believe that our side of the house caters to what women needs in the very first place, which is like a liberation on how they are oppressed in the status quo, but then B, on how we make harmless pregnancy as a right for every woman and not a privilege to only rich ones. Proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, second opposition, for the fine speech. Next, I'd like to invite third prop.
Panels, realize what the opposition is truly implying is that the woman is more valuable once the womb is removed from them. And this is the exact
patriarchal viewpoint that we reject in today's motion. Because they believe by removing a womb from a woman, that makes them inherently more valuable to society. And that's the problem. The problem is society regards it that way, regards the fact that pregnancy is a weakness, regards the fact that having a womb is a weakness, regards the fact that wanting to have children is a weakness. And this is exactly what they're purporting by firstly developing these kinds of things, even that is feasible, but when the instant they actually realize it, it will only be accessible to certain people and to certain privileged people who are not. The one thing that must be addressed in this debate is this vulnerable actors, which is people that are going to be exploited in third world countries, which I don't see how really advanced technologies like an artificial womb, a very fantastical piece of technology, will be accessible to third world country people who are struggling to find their next meal, for example. In a world where societies, governments, peoples, and institutions still treat women, especially disadvantaged, impoverished women, with callousness and cruelty, treating them as not but their value inside of their wombs, and using their dire situation to compel them in developing technology that they themselves most likely never see the fruit of, it is despicable. And to develop such technologies and not addressing present concerns is not what we should do. Because again, the opposition is trying to imply to you that a woman is only valuable once the burdens of their womb is going to be stripped out of them by having an artificial womb which most women will not be able to have, and therefore increase the amount of volatility against women and increase the polarity between men and women and gender tensions. Because yes, the men are being affirmed by their viewpoint that women are only worth about their wombs, right? But a point of parameters, how are we going to evaluate this debate? A, on the holistic welfare of all women, but also B, on the efficacy or even probability of an artificial womb technology in a broader sense. So if we can prove then, one, on our side, the welfare of most people is more insured instead of just a few privileged women are more likely to insure without the funding of artificial wombs bearing behind at the backload. But also secondly, the spreadness of this artificial womb technology is going to be minimal. We win this debate. Therefore, a few points of background. What kind of world does this debate arise in? Firstly, it is a patriarchal world in which the needs of marginalized women bearing the full brunt of structural issues are left unaddressed, and most people see women only as an object of sexual desire or an object of a womb, of actually giving you a child, for example, and useless otherwise, and all these kinds of things. But also, realize that most medicinal trials are usually targeted towards impoverished people that are more likely to tolerate risk for compensation or fiscal compensation. Parallel example, for example, surrogate mothers being picked in third world countries and made to raise the children before the child is taken away, for example. Or medical trials in the United States compelling impoverished people to participate in drug trials, especially wicked drugs. We did say that, like if you say that on our side, yes, there are surrogate mothers and therefore they'll still be exploited and stuff like that, we believe that on your side, that kind of exploitation is going to be even worse, right? Especially if it is not soluble to most populations of the world, especially if you take funding away out of other solutions like in vitro fertilization, but also actually curing the problems that make a woman not able to create a child in the first place, or enable a woman to become infertile and things like that. It takes funding away out of permanent solutions towards women infertility and the connection women want to have with their children. Because realize what women actually want, for example, when they want children. They do not want only the body, a physical body or physical manifestation of children, but they also want the connection to that child, right? They also want the feeling of, for example, the baby kicking their wombs or their stomachs whenever they are active, for example, or the feeling of, for example, your husband trying to communicate with the child in your womb and things like that. Things like that are things that women try to aspire to do, and we believe this artificial womb is not going to be that appealing to most women who actually want children, not only because that they want children to continue their lineage and things like that, but also realize that ethical guidelines only exist after testing. For example, taking their example of developing of AI, there are still massive and glaring ethical problems despite the amount of funding that is behind these kinds of things, which is a lot, and takes funding out of other societal concerns that can be addressed with other similar technologies like carbon capture on things like that. Because what is the impacts of things and rapid development of AI, for example? Massive ecological damage, for example, massive displacement of people because of data centers, for example, massive hikes of cost of living, which is the one thing that makes most women not able to get children in the first place. The cost of living is prohibitively expensive for them to get children and actually sustainably support them throughout their lifetimes, right? It is not because they are hindered by their pregnancies, for example. Most of the time, it is because they are unable to do so because they cannot pay for these children. And that is the exact kind of problem that a patriarchal society must address, must correct themselves to, in order to give these women actually the chance. Because even if you have an artificial womb, which is not going to be not that cheap, because it is very fantastical technology, and you still do not have the capability to raise that children on years upon years of schooling and all things like that, you're still screwed, right? Because you can't have children in a traditional sense without going into impoverished things, poverty, or otherwise like robbing yourself of your own needs. But a point of clash is then, A, will most women be protected both physically and society, but also B, will artificial wombs be at all accessible? I will start with A, will most women be protected both physically and societally? How do we contest this? Proposition comes to this debate swinging, saying that creating more structural protections, first to women who is trying to be protected by opposition opposition as being failed by opposition, because they do not give you guarantee why the ethical quandaries or foundations will then be addressed by companies and not by governments on our case, which will create more regulations before we actually develop these kinds of artificial womb in the first place, especially considering that most of these women that are being sourced towards to trial these artificial wombs are going to be women who are more inclined to accept these offers of these risky procedures because they need the money or compensation from those trials in the first place, right? There is no ethical guidelines among biotechnology. And my sourcing figure I've already told you, and I will elaborate more. Monsanto has already established and generated a lot of GMO foods, and other corporations have already followed this trend. And the problem is governments have not even clarified this. This is about plants, and plants, the governments and the corporations aren't even getting reprimanded for it. What if it's about human rights or human lives? If something like plants can be so entirely dismissed, and the factors and harms of it to the people will be so entirely dismissed by corporations, why can't this also not be dismissed, right? But also realize that societally, societally, this also creates, as I said before, implies that women are only valuable once the womb is already stricken out and actually external of themselves, and they always have to be a productive member of society and cannot then bow down to their biological needs, for example, like menstruation. Imagine what this implies for women who are unproductive because of menstruation. They will then thought up of another thing. Oh, because we have an external womb, we also want to have external menstruation so that women can then also work. This is the kind of narratives that will happen in opposition society, because the fact is today's world is filled with these kinds of influencers or these kinds of people in social media or the manosphere that actually advocates for ridiculous things like this, and a lot of people are actually believing in these kinds of ridiculous things, and this will only grant them the amount of vindication that they need to demand more and more of women to strip their humanity in order for them to be productive, in order for them to actually always love men, or actually for them to always be useful to men or be useful to society. The second point of clash is then, will artificial wombs be at all accessible? How do we contest this? Proposition says that artificial wombs are still expensive because parallel technologies with the same amount of accessibility like in vitro fertilization is still prohibitively expensive even now. For example, a woman, I know a certain person who have already done in vitro fertilization, and it cost them, for example, more than 40 million, and there's also a chance of failure, for example. They have not also accrued to you and guaranteed to you that artificial wombs will always perfectly simulate the environments of a womb and actually create a child 100% of the time, which is not the case, right? Because even in vitro fertilization, with all of its years of technology, is still failing sometimes, have a very large chance of failing, especially in people with abnormal production of embryos, for example. Because where are they going to source their embryos from? They have not also said to you how this will help people who already have damages upon their embryonic production cycles and things like that. And this will not even address these kinds of things in the first place, right? But they cannot claim and say that we will subsidize or things like that, because the main problem is not about people being physically hindered to have children. It is about them actually continually supporting their children through different economical needs and economical periods of their life, and therefore not having the amount of cost of living that is needed or affordable enough for them to continue having children. And this does not solve that problem. It only solves the physical problem, not the fiscal, not the societal, not anything like that, and therefore you cannot win opposition. Therefore, I rest my case.
Thank you, third proposition, for the fine speech. Next, third up. But before that, just a quick reminder for everyone, if you would like to talk to your teammates, please maintain your volume, okay? Yeah.
Am I audible? Panels, please note that development doesn't happen out of the blue. It's costly, and the possible backlash, especially in the term of something this sensitive as artificial womb, is very much likely to happen. And that's panels, and the development happens because of a reason, and we believe that the reason happened because one, either women who are either pregnant and facing lots of changes to their body, lots of negativity on their side. Like, what do I mean by negativity? Like postpartum depression, their change of body, may it be physical, may it be hormonal. You can't deny that the changes are there, and sometimes it's to the point that women can't handle it. Women are depressed because of it. Women are stressed because of it, and some women actually can't handle it. And because of they can't handle it during the pregnancy, what the aftermath of that pregnancy is either they hate their child or they feel uncomfortable with their child, and so on. This affects a lot of things. That's why this development exist in the first place. The development of the artificial womb is to take away the burden of being pregnant to women, but they can still have a child in a way that doesn't affect them. And what I want to call out from the proposition team, they say first that surrogates are also an exploitation of women, and it's linear with the exploitation of women in artificial development. But then their seconds say that surrogates exist, so there's no urgency to develop artificial wombs. I'm confused, panels. What do they mean serious by this? Is surrogates okay? Is it not okay like they're saying? Which side is exploitation in their side? Please take a note of that. And going on to rebuttals, they want more protection in our side to the woman. But they do nothing to protect the woman on their side. What about the women who are pregnant on their side? It's not that their side is harmful pregnancy or sexual. Thank you. Later, please. What about the woman in their side? There's not much they're saying about it. They're saying that pregnancy is something that they want. People will enjoy it and so on. But realistically, not all women want to be pregnant, and not all of them enjoy the suffering that comes with it. Why do I say suffering? Because it is a form of suffering, whereas your body will change. Your ability is minimized. Your mobility is minimized. You have lots of different ways of thinking, lots of different ways to do things. It's harmful to some women, even though it may not all be it. That's why the artificial development, no thank you. That's why the artificial development exists in the first place. And also, their case is contingent to the fact that ethical guidelines doesn't exist, but it does exist. And even though they say that the ethical guidelines isn't perfect and it's going to outgrow law or something like that, we believe that along the way this policy would grow with the artificial womb development, because the development and the research is going on, then the policy will grow with it. If something goes wrong, the policy will grow, and it will just be enough for this research and so on. And also note that this policy is limitation to the testing and not the afterwards of the testing itself. And this development is a choice. Again, using the artificial womb or going with the idea of artificial womb, it's a choice. And if they want to go through harmless pregnancy in their side, then sure. But note that in our side, it's more relevant and it's more okay, because in our side we also protect the woman who wants to go through harmless pregnancy. But if they don't want to go through pregnancy, then it's more okay, because there's the artificial womb who does that. And they're saying again that it's inaccessible and so on. First of all, it's still a development, and after development, sure, maybe for a few times it won't be accessible, but in the long run, it will still be accessible. And I don't understand that they keep going on about it's accessible, it's harmful, and so on and so on. This development is a choice. It doesn't mean that by having
POI.
Yes.
It's a very prohibitive choice, though. You don't understand why. You don't ever explain why this will be actually viable to people who cannot afford to have children traditionally in the same way, anyhow.
Regarding of that, I'll explain more in my speech later. Where was I? Again, this is a choice, and even though some people want to go through traditional pregnancy and so on, traditional pregnancy is harmful to some, not harmful to others, which is why we put this choice. Like I've said before, this development wouldn't happen if there's no problem in the first place regarding of that. And also, they say that they keep saying that in our side that there's going to be more patriarchal or stuff like that, because we see the woman is good solely because of their womb. We believe that no, it's not patriarchal in our side, because in this society, woman is woman most still to this society to this day. Woman is important because their ability to bear a child, but we believe that by having this artificial technology, by having this artificial womb, people can still have child, but they still can have the accessibility they can do to their daily life. They can still make an impact to society. They can still be a mother to this child. They can still be a good wife to their person, meaning that their value is still there to them. The value is still there. The value is still there for women. But just what we're pulling away is just the harm and the harm from women who are going through pregnancy. And harm comes from the method of development, and they keep saying on about regarding of harm, and we say that harm comes from the method of the development. We support the legal development. We're not saying that they should do a development illegally, they should do researches illegally, and so on. We're saying that we're doing this through a legal development, and even if they quit that, oh, there's must be going to be a way for them to do illegal development. We believe that no, this is a sensitive case in which it involves human life. Some people will surely take an eye on it, and they'll keep an eye on it, making sure that nothing goes wrong. It won't be illegal, it won't involve too much person, and so on. And it's also not elitist like they've said. It's not elitist like they said, because even though it's still a development, and development will be costly in the first time it's put to the public, in the long run it won't be as expensive, and it will be accessible for a lot of people. And again, that's why we believe that artificial womb should be developed, because first it takes away the harm from actual women who wants to be a mother, but they don't want to go through pregnancy because of the backlash that they'll have from the harms that they can get and so on. We believe that it's just a alternative for a woman who wants to have a children, who still wants to be a mother and so on, who still wants to go through their lineage, but without the backlash and the harm that they're going to receive by going through this pregnancy. And that's why we believe that we should develop artificial womb. That's all from me. I'm proud to propose.
Thank you, third opposition, for the fine speech. That's conclude the substantive speech for this round. I'd like to invite up reply.
Nunggu azan atau enggak? Oke. Women deserve respect even without the ability to get pregnant, even without having to go through suffering for 9 months, even without giving away their ability to do everything, even without giving away their agency. They should be respected, right? Two strategic mistakes coming from government. First, the mistakes about the approach that they give to the motion that only exists within a world that is very unlikely. See their case judge about exploitation. The prerequisite for this exploitation case to run have been explained by my speaker, i.e. the fact that ethical guidelines should not exist, the fact that societal backlash should not exist, etc., etc. The fact that company would pay a specimen of experiment or a specimen of research to shut up, for example, etc., etc., right? The world that exists under their side is very unlikely, is very unfair. In comparison, to prove to you, this clash is very important insofar as woman is the one who is the upstream of any other argument. They are the one who is most directly impacted. We are able to better prevent the exploitation that happens toward women insofar as we are able to prove to you that exactly pregnancy is the form of exploitation towards women, right? It takes away agency, it creates many harm, right? What exploitation is that you aren't able to do anything, it harms you in everything. Women aren't able to do anything. Women are harmed insofar as they got postpartum depression, for example. They got limited agencies, for example. The shift in the power dynamics in the relationships, for example, right? Many things. Therefore, exploitation exists under their side. We win simply on the likelihood of erasing exploitation. But secondly, on the biggest clash and the biggest strategic mistakes coming from their side of the house is that they value women out of her womb. This stand is so hateful, man. Like, not cool. Like, I'm not even there when my mom got pregnant. So do you guys. But I do able to respect her. We believe that there are other metrics for other people to respect women outside of their ability to get pregnant. Insofar as we want this, we don't want patriarchal value insofar as women are only valuable insofar as they are able to give children to men. No, there are other metrics for women to be valuable. But moreover, on the nitpicking parts, the thing is, they talk about external womb or removing your womb, etc., etc. This is not a just case insofar as I have proven to you in my setup. What we do is we allow for you to opt in to artificial womb, not erasing your womb or like deleting your womb so that you are forced to opt into this like artificial womb. No. This is not a coercion that happens. But moreover, they talk about like, oh, we remove maternity leave, etc., etc. But see, what's the a priori benefit here, judges? The reason that we care about maternity leave in the very first place is we want to compensate women for their suffering. It is not an ideal mechanization of compensation insofar as women has gone through active harm and they got money, which is not even like acceptable or fair. Like if you look at the UMR in Indonesia, for example, or the minimum wage in Indonesia, sorry. But yeah, what we do is that we change the mechanism of compensation. Instead of compensation, we prevent the harm that is done to women in the very first place, insofar as it is okay to not have maternity leave because they aren't going through any pain or suffering that should be compensated to in the very first place. We are able to prove to you that the upstream of helping women happens under our side of the house. We are able to prove to you why even if it is a deadlock in helping women, we won on one argument that they doesn't engage in, which is the accessibility of having children, which is very important because yeah, many people want to have children, many people are pushed to have children. We allow for this, therefore yeah, we create a better society. Gov doesn't stand a case. We do, we win. Thank you.
I thank to the op reply for that fine remarks. Next prop reply.
The brunt of the opposition case relies on, oh, women will get pregnant, oh, safety nets don't exist, oh, there's no other ways, and the only way you can solve this is by, for example, things like artificial wombs, right? We've already told you from our first to our third that safety nets have already existed, and they try and catch us with an aha moment by saying, oh, surrogates won't work well. But exactly because, for example, there are still problems with how current safety nets work, what then is the likelihood that these artificial wombs will get better than the current safety nets? They've never proven this. I think it actively gets worse because the resources are only going to be spread even more thin between, for example, surrogate mothers, between in vitro, like for example fertilization, and between, for example, your mechanism of, for example, artificial wombs, right? So we think their case falls, right? But okay, let's move on. What are opposition's crucial mistakes? Firstly, I think their entire framing depends on how it will become accessible in the future. But I think what they have to understand is the fact that it's not even guaranteed if you throw billions of dollars for it to even work, for it to even become accessible at the end of the day, right? And I think they've never engaged to the worst case when we've told you that things like exploitation happen. I don't understand why it's justified for women to, for example, get exploited over the course of something that is so extremely unguaranteed. Even if we play in our absolute worst case, where, for example, there doesn't exist things like exploitation, I think the massive opportunity cost from spending so much money into something so uncertain outweighs, for example, the current, for example, like status quo safety nets that could already be developed at the end of the day, that could already be developed, right? They could already be developed and become better at the end of the day, right? But secondly, I think they simply lose on exclusivity because their entire point is about pregnant women, and pregnant women, right? I think we've already told you that safety nets exist. We've already told you that, for example, those women who, for example, didn't want to get pregnant can still opt into things like surrogate mothers. I think they have zero urgency on their side of the house, exactly because there are already safety nets. I think we have urgency on our side of the house because of how this development is, for example, so harmful at the end of the day, right? But I think moving on then to what opposition has never proven. I think they've never proven why on their side of the house things like, for example, the law or like the other safety nets that they actually like come forward with will outweigh what we've already told you. We've already told you, like, for example, 3 structural reasons of why, for example, like the ethical guidelines are likely to fail, but their only response to this is like, oh, for example, laws exist. I don't think this is the case. Even if you look at like the most simplest cases of sex exploitation with things like, for example, Diddy, he's literally an individual and he's able to get so many lawyers to the point that he's able to run down his sentence from like life sentences to 4 years. I don't understand why companies are unlikely to do this. Their entire case runs on this premise, and I think we've already proven from our first to our third that it's actually like wrong at the end of the day, right? But I think firstly, they've also conceded that it's going to take a long time. I think they've never actually explained why this is a beneficial trade-off. We've explained that even if the trade-off is, for example, we don't have an extra safety net, it's fine because we're actually able to protect more women on our side of the house, right? But what have we actually proven, and why do we think we win this debate? I think we've proven how we can actually protect more women, and we've proven that this is an exclusive impact because all of their benefits and all of their harms already exist. I mean, all of their benefits already exist on our side of the house because of the safety nets we've already told you about. But this development literally is a harm that only happens on your side of the house, and it's one that we can literally prevent by actually stopping it, by opposing this development and actually like stopping, for example, abuse and things like that to actually happen on our side of the house, right? So what is the weighing they should take then? I think at the individual level, we win on scale, right? I think opposition tries to come and say, oh, it's going to be accessible, oh, it's going to be accessible. I think we've already proven to you so many times why it's not going to be accessible. But even if we bite the bullet and say, okay, it gets cheaper, the prerequisite for actually for research to get cheaper is the fact that you have to, for example, do more research at the end of the day, which is most likely going to be harmful research. So in the process of making it cheaper, you're probably going to exploit even more women. So I don't think it's justified on your side of the house. I don't understand why you can solve this on your side of the house, right? But I think at the individual level, we win on scale then, right? Because simply on our side of the house, we're able to protect more women, whereas on your side of the house, you're probably only going to protect like those privileged women at the end of the day. Their case is like about how, oh, pregnant women aren't able to work. It falls down. It's extremely inexclusive on their side of the house, right? They try and respond to this and say, oh, women are like unlikely to be seen as worse on our side of the house, or I don't understand how their case works. They try and tell you that when suffering isn't mandatory, like this makes women's, like, for example, rights better. But I think exactly like I think in the status quo, most people, for example, don't even understand how bad women's suffering is, which is why you need to make people understand women's suffering. I think they fail to do that on their side of the house when you tell them, for example, that women don't have to suffer on their side of the house. But I think at the societal level, we simply win on just like protecting the vulnerable actors, protecting those, for example, impoverished women who are literally being abused on their side of the house. Even if you have things like, for example, work women, I think our side is much more vulnerable because these are the women who are getting exploited. These are the impoverished women who get zero, for example, structural protection. So I think we win on exclusivity, and I think we win on our process analysis. So all of these reasons propose.
Thank you, Prof. Reply, for that fine remark as well. That's conclude the debate for this round. Thank you so much, everyone, for an interesting debate. You can just cross the floor, and then waiting the announcement from the OC. I think you can check the groups and then leave the rooms. Thank you so much. All the best for tomorrow.
Ini Cika, dia telah lulus SMA, tapi bingung mau kuliah di mana.
Jangan bingung, mari bergabung bersama kami di Universitas Atmajaya, Yogyakarta.
UAJY memiliki 7 fakultas dan 14 program studi yang dapat jadi pilihan loh.
Jangan khawatir, UAJY menyediakan miliaran beasiswa yang bisa kamu dapatkan. Tentunya, terdapat program seleksi yang masih dibuka. Informasi lebih lanjut dapat mengunjungi situs pmb.uajy.ac.id. So, tunggu apa lagi?
Bakal nyesel loh kalau nggak daftar sekarang.
Welcome to Yogyakarta, the city of students. The city where a significant number of public and private schools and universities are located. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta, a private university established on September 27, 1965 by Yayasan Slamet Riyadi Yogyakarta.
Dalam bahasa Sanskerta, Atma berarti jiwa dan Jaya berarti unggul. Sehingga Atmajaya berarti jiwa yang unggul. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta juga memiliki semboyan dalam bahasa Latin Serviens in Lumine Veritatis, yang artinya melayani dalam cahaya kebenaran.
The four core values upheld by UAJY are excellence, inclusivity, humanism, and integrity. Excellence implies a quality or being better than others. Inclusivity means encompassing all social groups. Humanism, the definition, means to serve the common interest of fellow humans. Integrity means adherence to the moral and ethical principles, honesty, reliability, consistency in words and acts, and a sense of responsibility. UAJY supports diverse values, cultures, religions, races, ethnicities, and languages as a university with students from all across Indonesia. UAJY's diversity is an asset for further collaboration and synergy in preparing for a better future.
Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta memiliki 4 kampus yang terbagi menjadi Kampus 1, Gedung Santo Alfonsus. Kampus 2, Gedung Santo Thomas Aquinas, Kampus 3 Gedung Santo Bonaventura, dan Kampus 4 Gedung Bunda Teresa. Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta memiliki fakultas dengan berbagai program studi sarjana, program studi magister, dan international undergraduate program.
Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta is the second home for every individual to develop and share information, and a university with a high-quality education to attain unlimited aspirations and accomplishments. To achieve the goals, UAJY provides classrooms with a hybrid learning system, laboratories in each faculty as a room to explore, co-working space as a discussion room, medical personnel who are always available in the university clinic room, and a library that provide books, e-books, and digital libraries to open a wide window onto the world in various ways.
UAJY selalu konsisten memberikan pelayanan yang didasari rasa solidaritas kepada sesama. Selama saya bekerja di UAJY, saya merasakan kekeluargaan yang sangat kuat menjadi dasar bagi seluruh sivitas akademika.
UAJY endeavors to develop graduates who are ethical, creative, innovative, adaptive, transformational, collaborative, and benevolent. All these are aimed to help students achieve their future dreams.
Mendidik itu mengajarkan ilmu pengetahuan dan berbela rasa serta berkontribusi pada kesejahteraan masyarakat. Hal tersebut menjadi landasan fundamental bagi Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta untuk mencetak generasi muda yang unggul di bidangnya dan memiliki integritas moral yang tinggi. Saya bangga menjadi bagian dari Universitas Atmajaya Yogyakarta. Viva UAJY, kami bangga ada di sini.